Hello and welcome back to another very special episode of the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I am your host, Matt Belair, and today's guest was a former FBI agent, investigator for over 20 years, and collector of the real life X-Files. If you are my friend and you live in Cambridge and you've been around me, you know I've been talking about this guy for a while. Super excited to have him on the podcast. Today, he is revealing these stories as a leading researcher and writer on the paranormal. He was an attorney and investigator who maintained a top secret security clearance for many years. This background infused him with an ability to decipher mysteries that are beyond conventional abilities. The X-Man John Desouza is today releasing these true stories and changing the face of the paranormal and understanding of reality. Welcome to the show, John Desouza. What's up, brother?
Thanks, Matt. Wow, Matt Belair, Blue Jeans Network. Wow, I'm so happy to finally be here with you. Fantastic.
Yeah, man.
And
Me too, brother.
And the beard is real. I can testify to that. Having just been with you at Contact in the Desert. Yeah, got to put my hands on that thing. Yeah, it's real. That's a good deal.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I know. It was such a nice meeting. I don't know what I was doing there in general. I just kind of vibed to Contact in the Desert. We met. I saw your smiling face, and then it didn't make any sense. I was like, oh, what are you up to? You're like, oh, I work for the FBI. I was like, whoa, you seem like a really happy-go-lucky, so friendly guy. Like you really exude like a lot of love and happiness. So I didn't really see you as like I couldn't imagine you in a suit doing a formal job, being an investigator for over 20 years.
Yeah, it's funny that you would say that because I am I have such a gregarious kind of like positive, happy attitude towards people, especially now that I'm in a different community, in the paranormal, writing my books on topics like ufology and para-investigation, things like that. But even when I was in the FBI, people would tell me that it was like a different personality when I was involved in the war on terrorism for, a long time. And when I would have to go into that arrest and attack mode, the people would be pretty shocked when they would see a very, very different kind of person than what I normally was. But, to be in that kind of work, you got to be able to channel that kind of thing. And I always was able to. Being an FBI agent is a very unique kind of job, and you got to have that professionalism, that positive attitude during a lot of the time. But there were times also that I had to, when I had a judge's order in my hand, and I had to lay my hands on people sometimes and force them to do whatever I needed them to do. And that's a different kind of attitude, and it was something that had to be done at times, because terrorism was real. It was real, and terrorists were real. Even though there's also a lot of false flags that happen these days, things that aren't really what they seem like they are. But also, though, the terrorists are also real too, and they are often moving parts in a lot of these operations that we see happening all over the place.
Right. Yeah, I can't even imagine. You were in pretty intense units. You have an acronym for them. So you had the War on Terror unit, and you worked in another unit as well, right? Something else that was pretty intense.
Well, I mean, I was also involved in the war on drugs, but for the most part, I did not really participate in that. As little as I could. There were large sections of it that I would not become involved in because I could tell that the war on drugs was not something that was for benefit of the people. It was more of a war against people, and it continues to be for many various reasons. Building up the industrial prison complex that is the biggest in the United States than any other industrialized country in the world, and several other items too, like having marijuana be illegal in the United States, but to have people actually go to prison for it and take up prison space that should go to violent offenders. So I tried not to participate in the war on drugs as much as possible. But the real truth is that when you have comrades that need you for an arrest or an operation, you have to do that. You have to do that to help the people that you work with. And so I did participate in the war on drugs in that sense from time to time, but as little as possible on my part.
Right. Huh. Okay. So do you want to give the audience just how did you get into, this whole switch? Like, if you want to go over the brief story, were you always interested in the paranormal and things like that? Or was it something that happened when you worked for the FBI? Or how did that kind of play out for you to get to where you are today?
Well, when I was a kid, about 9, 10 years old, I had experiences of the paranormal, especially with ufology. I had an experience in New York City when I was a kid of coming in face-to-face contact with an actual UFO. And I can just tell you real briefly, I was in New York City. I was attending a party with my family, some rented hall in New York City, late at night, hundreds of people at some kind of wedding reception. And me and a bunch of kids spilled out into the night. We went out. It was deserted. The streets were deserted. And we went out playing tag or Galivio, playing games out there. And it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, way past our bedtime. And one of the other kids just got a little spirited and hit me in the stomach. I fell down on the sidewalk. One of the kids said, hey, he's really hurt. So they all ran back to the building, or ran back to where we were, and just left me there. And I was staring up in the sky. It was a very starry night. And I was staring up between two tall buildings. And I looked up, and there were stars everywhere except one spot above these two tall buildings. And I was looking at them. And this one dark spot was like an ink cloud, like the kind of squid would give off when you try to catch them in the water. And then from the bottom of this ink cloud comes these spotlights. I see these lights coming out from the bottom of the cloud, and it just comes in it was old-fashioned looking flying saucer, just comes out of the bottom of this cloud right towards me. It had the lights spinning in the bottom, and it appeared kind of metallic, and it's coming down towards me from this dark cloud, this ink cloud. And I feel that spotlight. And I've talked to lots of witnesses in the years since. They all have felt this spotlight, this bluish greenish spotlight that just hits you, and you feel it all through your body. You feel it like it's examining you at a cellular level. Even spiritually, you feel it. And I felt that spotlight, and I just keep looking up at this thing as it's coming towards me. Two teenage girls appear on my left side, and they're just screaming and hugging each other and looking up at this thing. So I know there was somebody else there seeing this at the same time. And they're just screaming. And this one of the girls yells at me, "Little boy, you better run home. The world might be ending." And then they disappeared. And it was like me and this UFO changed our minds at the same moment. I stepped back out of the spotlight, and the thing reversed course at the same moment. And it's just going back up into that cloud. And like a cartoon character jumps in a hole and pulls a hole in after it, the thing went up in the cloud, and the cloud was gone. And that was it. I ran back to that building, ran back to where my parents were. And I tried to tell them the story in public, and my parents didn't want to hear it. Later at home, it went better. But I told them about it, and my mom gave me the briefing about that you have to be very careful who you talk about these paranormal topics in front of, because there can be repercussions for that sort of thing. And I took her very seriously, and I was more careful from there on forward who I talk about these things in front of. And that was my first experience of the paranormal. And later I had a personal experience with alien visitors in my dad's house, just a few weeks later, because I believe that these UFOs, according to the cases I've seen too over the years, these UFOs collect information on people, on individuals, and bring it back somewhere. And then alien visitors decide if they're going to visit this person in person. And that's what happened to me just a few weeks after that experience. I was in my parents' home. I was just sleeping, and suddenly the room just changed. the air, the atmosphere, I don't know, like a cold vapor just went through the room, the bedroom. And I went stiff as a board. And then I feel hands at my feet and my head, and they're just lifting me up and lifting me up. But it was the lifting continued, and they lifted me up right through the room. And they were climbing on nothing. They were just climbing in the air, and they were also floating through the air and lifting me up towards the ceiling. And I see the ceiling coming closer and closer to me. And they then get me right up against the ceiling, and they're passing through the ceiling themselves. And I couldn't see them, though, because I was completely stiff, but I could just feel them in my peripherals. I could see what appeared to be small children to me. And they were just going through the ceiling. And when they were trying to pass me through the ceiling as well, but my forehead prevented it. And it was a bump there. And they just bumped it, and then they lowered me. And I was like a helium balloon half filled with helium. And they just lowered me, and wherever they left me in the air, that's where I stayed. And they examined the spot where my forehead didn't go through. They were like the worst engineers in the world. They were just like examining the spot again and again. And then they tried to lift me up and tried the exact same action again. And the forehead wouldn't go through. And again, I was bumping my forehead. And again, I say they were like the worst engineers in the world because they kept on repeating the same results, repeating the same actions, expecting different results. And my forehead wouldn't go through. But as they bumped my head against the ceiling, I was able to move my neck more and more. Like the stiffness was like letting up. And I was able to move my neck. And the first thing I did was look down at my bed sheets to see if I was dead, because that was a thought that occurred to me, like maybe I was dead and this was my spirit that they were moving around. And so I looked back in my bed, and I was glad to see it was just rumpled sheets there. So I was alive at least, and I was really there physically somehow. And then I was able to, as they kept on doing this action, I was able to move my neck again. And my parents' bedroom was right next to the bedroom, my bedroom, but the door was open, and I could see into their room, and I could see again what looked like two small children holding their hands over my parents' bed. And they were like holding my parents in some kind of stasis field because they couldn't wake up. And I could see them struggling to wake up, and there were pools of sweat underneath them, and they could not wake up. And then I was craning my neck a little more. And remember, I was up against the ceiling at this point, or close to it. And I was craning my neck a little more, and I could see one of the creatures on the ground. There was two of them, but I could see the one closest to me. And he looked over at the two that were with me, who, again, I couldn't quite see. But I saw the one on the ground who looked over, and he was holding his hands over. And he looked at me, and I looked directly at him. And it was those big black wraparound eyes. And that it had the appearance of what we understand to be like a gray alien being. Very small, very slight in appearance, but the heads were larger than what they should have been, and sort of triangular in shape. But those eyes, you never forget those eyes once you see them, because they appear so intelligent, but it feels like there's nothing behind there. And he just looked directly at me, and I looked at him for a moment. And I heard the only words I was ever going to hear from them. And again, it wasn't spoken. It was inside my head. Very loud. I heard, "He's awake." And I think he was talking to the two that were with me. And as soon as he said that, it was like a cord was cut. I fell down heavy as cement. I just fell down into my bed, just slammed in there. And then they were gone. Everything was gone. They were gone. The home felt different. The air, the environment. And they were completely gone. And then I was just gathering my courage to wake up my parents, who now appeared relaxed, but still asleep. And I was like, just getting ready to wake them up. I knew I would never fall asleep again. And then I just fell asleep. I was out. I was out until the morning. And that was my first great experience in ufology. And it happened, like I said, I was about 9 years old when it occurred. So I was an experiencer in these things long before I joined the FBI, long before.
Holy smokes. Was that some of your motivation when you started to look at what it took to get into the FBI?
Well, it wasn't motivation to get into the FBI. The reason I became an attorney, and I knew I didn't want to really practice law. So it wasn't the motivation to get into the FBI. It was kind of an aside issue, and I didn't think that the paranormal would ever come back to me once I became an FBI agent. But wow, it did. It followed me. Both ufology and other issues in the paranormal just seemed to follow me no matter where I went and no matter what I did, and especially in the FBI. And why I wrote my first book, The Para-Investigators, because these experiences, even in law enforcement, just kept following me wherever I went. And I don't know if that's because of me, something about me personally, or just, I don't know, destiny in general. I don't know which one it is that occurred.
Wow. And so most of the stories in that first book, is it all cases of you and the experiences you've had, or a collection of cases from other people that you kind of documented and worked through?
It's both. My book, The Para-Investigators, True Tales and Concepts of Supernaturally Gifted Investigators, those are my personal stories of things that I've gone through, but also I became a collection point in the FBI, in law enforcement, for other people's experiences as well, because things that they couldn't talk to anybody about, they would come to me and give me those stories and let me know things unbelievable things that happened to them. And I just collected them all and put them together. And I can give you, as an example, probably the most widely documented story that's most well known is the first story in my book, the Indigo Kids of 911, which is the story that actually occurred in the days and weeks before 9/11 attacks that happened in New York City. Just a few days before, we had these little kids all over the country, dozens and dozens of cases of these little kids, ages from like 5 years old all the way to 11 years old, 11, 12 years old, who were having precognition experiences, dreams, visions of precisely what happened in 9/11 in New York City in the days and weeks. And they had these experiences just days before 9/11 happened. And what happened, and parents didn't report their own kids, but we had caretakers who reported these kids in, babysitters, school bus drivers, nannies, teachers who reported these experiences in on these kids. And these kids all had to be interviewed. They had to be spoken to by these task forces, both FBI and regular police officers that worked on these task forces, that had to go talk to these little kids and find out if there was any connection between their families and terrorism, because of all the hysteria that was going on right after 9/11 happened. So, and I can, as examples, we had, for instance, there was like a little girl who was on a playground, and she wasn't playing with the other kids. She was just kind of sitting in the dirt and just tracing designs with her fingers and by herself. So the teacher comes over to her and says, "You okay, sweetheart? Or, what's going on?" And the little girl says to her, I'm just thinking, I'm fine." And teacher goes to walk away, and the little girl grabs her skirt and pulls on it violently and says to her, "Tomorrow, make sure you stay away from tall buildings, because tall buildings sometimes fall down and they can fall on people." So that's one little girl that was reported in that situation once 9/11 happened. Another little boy was in a class doing arts and crafts. He was doing finger paintings, and teacher comes over to him and says, "Oh, that's very nice. It's very beautiful. You're painting there. These two tall buildings, they're glowing, and it looks like there's angels flying out of these buildings with red wings." And the little boy says to the teacher, those buildings are on fire. They're not glowing. And those aren't angels with red wings. Those are people on fire jumping out of the buildings. And the teacher walks away from a little boy like that and doesn't think more about it until 9/11 happens. And then she, says, I don't know if I should be reporting this, but I gotta report it because it's just a weird thing that happened. And then we had to go and interview that little boy and find out. Another little boy was on a school bus and apparently didn't get any sleep the night before because he fell asleep, dead asleep. And he's the last little kid on the bus, and the school bus driver goes back to wake him up, and so he can go. And as he wakes him up, the little boy wakes up and is screaming about people being on fire and jumping out of a building, you see. So again, that school bus driver doesn't think about that again until 9/11 happens, and then he reports it in as something possibly could be here. And so, like I said, we had no discretion on these cases. There was mandatory policy. Anything that had any possible connection to terrorism had to be interviewed, had to be checked. And we had to run out these leads. And some of these kids, they didn't even want to remember these experiences, but we had to sit there with them and their parents and remind them of these experiences. And then we had to background check the families to make sure there was no connection to terrorism, possible connection to terrorism. And and we did all these. And like I said, there were dozens and dozens of these cases all over the country. And in every single case, every one of these cases came back no connection to terrorism whatsoever. So that the paranormal answer was the only answer there was on these. And these cases, greatly affected me and all the other officers that were involved in these cases. It affected them very deeply. And it changed them. It changed their attitude. It changed them from being just regular investigators to para-investigators, which are just people that see beyond, investigators that see beyond what is just the material physical reality.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I've heard of, a lot of stories like that growing up. Even things like, miracles, remote viewing. That's something you are most likely familiar with, used in the army and things like that. What other types, when you say paranormal, like what are some other examples? We have precognition. From what are some of the other examples that you are aware of?
Well, it's interesting that you said remote viewing, because one of the most famous examples I talk about in the Para-Investigators is a story called Death from a Broken Heart, which is the story of Richard Jewell. He's a security guard just a paunchy guy with a southern drawl. Didn't seem like he was going to accomplish much in life. But there was one night when he became the greatest investigator that ever lived. It was in Atlanta, Georgia. I believe it was 1996 Olympics. And in Atlanta, Georgia, they were having the event after the Olympics. It was late at night. And there were thousands of people celebrating and walking through this Olympic park in Atlanta, Georgia. And they were, it was a lot of festivities, a lot of families. Even though it was late at night, the Olympics had let out, and it was like a celebration kind of atmosphere. And there were even media people all over that park too, who were with television cameras, who were interviewing athletes, the real athletes who participated in the Olympics. So it was like a big party, sort of camp out atmosphere out there. And there was one security guard named Richard Jewell, who just seemed like an average guy, didn't seem like anything special, but he happened to go through one of these walking paths, and he saw one of these giant hiking bags with the frames on it that's like almost like 5 feet tall. One of these things you pack everything into, and it was sitting by itself because it has a frame, so it could stand up by itself, and it was sitting in the middle of a walking path where hundreds of families and people were just walking right by it. He looked at it immediately, Richard Jewell did, and he said, "That's a suspicious package," and he declared it a suspicious package. that could have been a bomb. And so he did, instead of like just grabbing it and hauling it into lost and found, or grabbing it, and which is exactly what you're not supposed to do, grabbing it and hauling it over to a superior officer to say, hey, what do we do with this thing? Like most security guards would have done. Instead, as soon as he declared it a suspicious package, he started setting up police lines around it, barriers around it to seal it into the area. And then he began to tell people to leave the area. Do not walk through this path anymore. Get out of here. Get out of this area. He radioed it in to his superiors, and he said he had found a suspicious package. He declared it suspicious, and that they should follow all protocols, emergency protocols, for taking care of a package like this, and anything else that we need to do to bring in here, barriers, put up barriers, whatever we need to do. And he was noticing that people were still walking too close to it, because he didn't want people just out of the immediate area. He wanted them out of the outer area too. And they weren't listening to him. So he started getting more physical and more upset. And and this is all on cameras, because people were actually filming him on the ground with their own devices, as well as him being on CC camera as well. But so people could tell that, one, he never touched the package ever. And also, two, that he was getting more and more hysterical to get people far away from this package, because it could be a bomb. And so he began yelling at them, and just hysterically yelling at people and using his body and telling them, people, this could be a bomb. Get out of this area. Do not come through here. Get out of here. And so what happened was that as investigators on the ground were later, and anyway, and eventually the bomb did go off, and it ended up killing one person, which is a tragedy, but it would have killed dozens of people if he had not done what he did, because people were walking by this thing, like families, many people, hundreds of people were walking right on top of this thing like nothing was going on. And what he did basically was he saved dozens of lives, probably, by his actions. And he was declared a hero. He was celebrated. But the problem was, investigators on the ground started reviewing these videos of him, and as I did later also. And their conclusion, as they kept watching these videos of him being hysterical and being upset and just yelling at people to get out of the area, as they listened to his voice, the pitch, the tenor of his voice, and his demeanor, it became obvious to him, it became obvious to the investigators there, that he knew it was a bomb. When I reviewed the videos as well, it became obvious to me too that he did know it was a bomb, and he did. But the conclusions that we had were different, though, because they concluded that the only way he could know that it was a bomb was that he planted the bomb in order to be a hero. My conclusion was very different. I could see immediately that he knew it was a bomb because he remote viewed into that package, into that hiking bag, or he somehow had some kind of precognitive experience, vision of what was inside of there, because he absolutely, and he himself in later months, he actually said he did have complete awareness that it was a bomb. He did know that. So they basically declared him to be a person of interest in this bombing, basically accused him of being the bomber, and the media went crazy with that narrative. They all trumpeted all over the world that he was the bomber, and basically ruined his life for 88 days. For 88 days, he was declared the bomber in all the newspapers and media outlets, on television, all over the world. They basically destroyed his life. And at the end of 88 days, the U.S. attorney came forward and said, "Whoops, he's not the bomber. He's not a person of interest. He's not the guy. we're sorry. And shortly after that, of course, they found out that Eric Robert Rudolph actually confessed that he was the bomber and that he had planted the bomb at Atlanta, Georgia, and that he was the one, and he had done not just that bombing, but many others as well. But it was too late for Richard Jewell. His health had been broken. The experience had destroyed basically his life, and all he really did was use a paranormal ability to save many people's lives. That's all that he was guilty of. Unfortunately, he was terribly, terribly punished for it.
Holy smokes. So yeah, it's really interesting hearing your perspective and the detail you go into, because that's your job. You have to figure out, one way or another, and somebody can just assume, if you're on my side of the spectrum where I like the paranormal, I like the unseen, remote viewing, healing, all that kind of stuff. So I'm like, oh yeah, he used his skills. And then the other side is you got to prove it. So you're kind of merging these two worlds together, and then deducing whether or not, through very skilled observation, through elite training, to figure out what the actual truth is. So I guess where I want to go with this is you've seen a lot of paranormal things, and then in your second book is on extra dimensionals, which is essentially aliens or other beings. So I think I have two questions. One, I'd like you to talk about that book, and two, and this might, it's just, I guess, so I remember it. It's that when we're looking at these things, like, how can this be practically applied? Like, how is this useful to somebody who is, maybe looking at this sort of thing, expanding their awareness, because you're seeing and experiencing these things that most people find unbelievable. This isn't real or whatever. Where you're like, nah, man, like, this is actually a real thing. With looking at this broader sense of awareness, is there anything practical that we can take back for somebody who's listening and saying, hey, these are some of the things that are possible, like with being a human? Like, the reason why I like remote viewing is it just more proof that we all have psychic powers. I
Yes.
love that. And we're all intuitive. If I drop you in the middle of a forest somewhere and you don't know where you are, you'll guess your way out. Well, that's intuition. Like, you cannot not have it. Now, how you develop it is another thing. So I'm not sure if you can go anywhere with that rant. Maybe we could just start with the book, The Extra Dimensionals, or practical applications from an expanded awareness from what you've experienced.
Yeah, I mean, now I definitely can go somewhere with that rant, because that's the whole basis of what I write about in the Para-Investigators. It's contained within that book. It's not just stories of supernaturally gifted investigators. It's also a primer on what investigation really is, what real evidence actually is, because those are the things I've worked with all my life. And I know that real evidence and a real investigation is not what we learn from television, from CSI, and from scientists that say only what you can put in a test tube, only what you can measure is science, is evidence, because that's not the case at all. The evidence and what constitutes evidence for us is a much wider range of things, even things that you can't touch, things that you can't see in the material. They still are real evidence of things. So in the Para-Investigators, I give a basic primer on what real investigation means, what it includes, and then how a person can go from being a regular investigator, which we all are. I mean, anyone in this community, they're all investigators. They're all looking for the truth. And I've even talked to ghost hunters, to UFO hunters, people who they're dedicated investigators, but they need to get that jump of how to go from being a material, physical investigator to being able to even resolve investigations where the solution is not in the material. It's not in the physical world. The solution requires you to be a para-investigator and jump into the ethereal, into the ether, to get the final solutions for these investigations. So I do workshops. I do workshops for people to to learn these basic skills, to go from being, and that's the hardest jump. That's the hardest jump of all, to go from being investigator, a good investigator, to being a para-investigator, to be able to look deeper into places where regular investigation just stops. It just stops because they can't go any further. And that's what the para-investigators is all about. It's all about when the answer, it can't be found in the regular world, and you have to go further beyond what the regular world is. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle said a long time ago, he said, the answer, once you eliminate the impossible, then the answer is, no matter how unlikely, is the highly improbable. And you have to, and really the addendum to that is nothing's really impossible. Nothing really is. So that's something that I have to teach people. I have to teach people because they don't have that anywhere else. There's no place else people can learn that. And and all I can do is give people examples of why that's so important. There's a story called The Red Shirt. That's a story of an officer who was just rolling around, and he rolled up to this corner where there was a lot of drug trafficking going on, a lot of drug sales, and he stops his car about 100 feet short of where all these guys were doing drug sales and trading drugs. And he stopped his car, and he just goes to get out. And from like even over 100, it was more than 100 feet, but like 200, even from 200 feet away, they spotted him for a cop. And everyone on that street corner they just dispersed. I mean, they ran in every direction. Well, there had been some kind of police operation already going on in the area. So there were there were officers like around every corner right there. So he got back on the radio, the officer who was stopped short of the corner about 200 feet. He got back on the radio, and he says into the radio, stop that one guy, the one with the red shirt. Out of all these guys, there was one guy who had a red shirt on. He says, stop the guy in the red shirt. He's got a gun. And then, so the cops around the corner were able to get the guy in the red shirt. They let everybody else go, and they just focused on that guy. So they did grab him. And then they searched his belt line, and there was no gun there. They went into his baggy pants, and deep inside the pocket, there was a gun. And they took it out. And they took it out carefully, of course, sealed it and so forth, and went and took it for examination. And first of all, they said, okay, how did you see a gun from 200 feet away? So there were questions right away. How did that officer see a gun from 200 feet away? And it wasn't even in the guy's waistline. It was like deep inside of a pocket. How did he even spot that was there? And the officer ended up saying, I don't know how I knew, I just knew, which you're not allowed to say. You're not allowed to say that in law enforcement, because it turned out, especially if you're going to some kind of a courtroom situation, because turned out the gun had been used in a couple of attempted murders in the previous weeks as they tested it and they examined it. And so the sergeant had to have a talk with this officer who said the wrong thing, and he had to tell him what you could say and what you can't say. He says, look, as an investigator, you can't say, oh, I had a vision, or, this came to me from the ether, or I had an intuition that the guy had a gun. There were rumors even swirling around this officer that guy may have been a snitch of his that he no longer needed. And so he was just turning him in, and he knew he had a gun because it was his custom probably. And none of that was true, but that's the kind of trouble you can get into when you, as an investigator, you use these paranormal gifts, you use your intuition, and people just can't take that. And the system can't take that either. So the sergeant had to talk with the person and told them what you can't say. And you can say that, through my ordinary experience in this type of neighborhood and the usual probable cause that has become apparent to me in the course of this investigation, I surmised and reached the conclusion that that individual was of the type of individual that would have a gun on them at that time. That kind of language. So he gave him a primer on the kind of language that you can use. And that would be allowable and permissible. And he did change the language so that the gun could go into evidence and be used in some fashion. But anyway, that's just an example of how people use these abilities and how they can't use these abilities, because depending on the situation that you're in, you got to learn where you can use them, but then you got to learn how you can articulate them without raising alarms.
Right. Well, that's it. You're coming from the perspective of really high level investigator, and I think that skill set is super valuable for the information overload that is happening now. So,
yeah.
For some of the audience out there, UFOs are old news, aliens are old news. For some of them, there's like, well, I don't know about aliens, but whatever. But once you go to Contact in the Desert or Sedona, it's aliens all day, every day, up, down, sideways. And you begin to look at teachers giving information, different experts and things like that, different experiences, and you're sifting information. It becomes really challenging because, when I was at Contact in the Desert, for example, it's like, this guy's disinformation, this guy's good, and this guy is someone else. So it becomes really, really challenging to figure out what the heck is going on, because it's like, holy smokes, like pyramids, like different races. Apparently, the CIA or the FBI has different lists of ships that they've seen. I don't know if you can say that that's true or not true. The different levels of beings. Some people say that the Anunnaki are in the government, and then, that they just control the government. And then you've got, people that give whole lists, and it's in the pyramids. It gets crazy really fast. And I know that I have no idea what the flying F-bomb is going on, but it's interesting. So go ahead.
Yeah. So let me tell you this though, at a place where, Contact in the Desert, where you have a lot of alternative information, and you've got like some really like way out there stuff. My point of why people need to learn to become para-investigators and very good regular conventional investigators too, is because at a place like Contact in the Desert, where there's so much alternative information that's like way out there, at least you have a chance that the stuff they're saying is completely true and right on target. The problem is now in our mainstream society, we've reached a point where we're at that Orwellian kind of society now, where pretty much 100% of everything that's out there in the mainstream is pretty much false. It's fake news, it's disinformation, it's misinformation. Disinformation means false on purpose. They know that they're giving you false information, they're doing it on purpose. That's only like small percentage of the false information out there. Most information is misinformation, unfortunately, where you have newscasters telling you stuff that they think might be true, but it never is. It never is. And we have returned back, and it's amazing, in just a couple of decades, we have returned back to this complete Pravda situation of complete false information in the mainstream, where, I mean, basically none of it is true. It's all either distraction, it's just false on purpose. Just when I was in the FBI in the 90s, we had the Soviet Union was experiencing something that I tell people about called the Dog Walkers Rebellion. The Dog Walkers Rebellion. And all that was the Soviet Union had a complete Pravda system of information. The networks were Pravda 1, Pravda 2, Pravda 3. across 3 time zones, millions and millions of people, and all being fed. All the newspapers were Pravda, which is the Russian word for truth, I think. And that just meant completely controlled by the government and totally manipulated false information system. So what happened was at 6 p.m., wherever it was 6 p.m., across the Soviet Union, across 3 time zones, whenever it was 6 p.m., they had the evening news, like we had the evening news with Dan Rath or whatever. And they had the evening news that way. And people noticed that everybody just left their homes at 6 p.m. because people just withdrew from the news system. They didn't want to hear the evening news. So everybody at 6 o'clock, instead of having dinner and watching the evening news, every single person, they all went out to walk their dogs at that time. So 6 p.m. across the Soviet Union became the dog walking hour. And everybody went out to walk their dogs. And they started noticing each other, especially in these dog parks. And they could get together in these dog parks and get together with their dogs without being concerned that the KGB would rouse them or harass them for having illegal gatherings that were not authorized. And so these gatherings became greater, bigger, and bigger with the dogs, as long as they had the dogs for cover. And they used those gatherings to get information from each other from the West, because any information, any news, even phone calls, anything that they could trade information to each other, anything from the West had some likelihood of being true. Whereas if they just stayed and listened to the Pravda system of news, it was always false, completely false. And so the Dog Walkers Rebellion was all these millions and millions of people who just withdrew. They withdrew from the mainstream news system of the Soviet Union. By the time the Soviet Union was ready to fall, it was found out later that in those final years, like 89 and 90, in those final years, nobody was listening to Soviet Union news, Pravda, anymore except government officials. Regular people just left. And so the government completely lost their ability in the information war, the ability to reach out with information into the general population. That was completely cut off. Then it was cut off by the people and by the Dog Walkers Rebellion. And just in a short couple of decades, it's amazing how in the Western world, we're back again in the same place. I mean, repeating exactly the same patterns, where we are now again in that Orwellian system of complete and total Pravda, fake news, fake information, and a mainstream that is misinforming us. And that's why people like you, Matt, have risen, where the citizen journalists, the citizen informers, people who are letting us know, informers not a good word, people who are letting us know what's really going on. And it's coming from the citizen, just like the Dog Walkers Rebellion in the Soviet Union. And so we are the new Dog Walkers Rebellion here in the Western world today, because we're facing the identical situation that happened back then. And it's amazing how accurately the patterns are repeating again. And that's why, because the things, even when people say, oh yeah, stuff on the internet, it's all BS. There's so much BS. How do you know, who's telling the truth and all that? But at least there's a good chance that a lot of the material from citizen journalists is absolutely accurate. When you leave yourself in the sewage of the mainstream, basically it's 100% not accurate. It's 100% either BS, untrue, or manipulation, which could be partially true in order to herd you towards a certain result. And so anyway, that leads me back in a long-winded way to answer your first question. How are these practical skills to learn for people? And the way that they're practical skills is because when you're a good conventional investigator, and then you learn to go that one step beyond into being a para-investigator, what it does is it helps you in this system of universal deceit. It helps you to be able to penetrate any nonsense that you are presented with, where, first of all, you go through some new protocols. Number one, you always assume anything from the government is false. That's just a presumption. Anything from the mainstream media is absolutely false. That always has to, as a para-investigator, that has to be your first go-to right away. You have to just assume that that is the case. And always, and when you're listening to independent citizen journalists who you choose, always presume that they are actually telling you the truth. And you go from there. Now, that doesn't mean that presumption can change. Those presumptions can change. But do we have to get rid of the old conditioning that my dad had, that if he sat down in front of Dan Rather in the evening news, that whatever he was getting was probably the truth. And then, we would see whether it was not true or not. No, we got to get rid of that. Got to get rid of that. And we can't wait for a generation to die off. We got to do it now. We got to get rid of that conditioning and change it, invert it, so that we know anything coming out of the mainstream basically is just to serve global institutions. It's just to serve global. It's not to serve us. It's not to inform us. It's not to uplift us. And it's not to help us solve any mystery at all. So we have to go from those assumptions and then learn our basic investigation tactics, learn what it means to actually investigate like a law enforcement person would. Not just like because here's what I bring that's different. I'm not, the way that scientists and journalists examine or investigate is very, very different from the way that law enforcement would examine a situation or the truth of a situation. Law enforcement, journalists and scientists, they just go in and they find it, because they're more like data miners. They find out the who, what, where, why, and how of every situation. That's always their base DNA to go in there and find that out. But the way that law enforcement goes in is that law enforcement goes in and looks for a subject, looks for who's committing this act. Are they real? Is the Bigfoot creature, is the crypto creature real? And now how are we going to find out if it's real? Because you got to treat it like a subject of a crime, for instance, a suspect in a crime. And you go on a scene and you just do the basic DNA, the basic things that are in the DNA of all law enforcement situations, which is you go on and you do the 5 S's. You seal it, separate, sample, survey, and take statements. Those are the 5 S's of any law enforcement situation. And seal it just means you do like what Richard Jewell did. You seal up the scene where it happened, whatever it is. You seal it up somehow. And it doesn't matter what you use or what you do, but you seal it to give it some isolation. You go in and you separate, either separate witnesses from each other or you separate artifacts. Artifacts can give off magnetic fields that interfere with each other. So you separate. Whatever it is you're dealing with, you separate. Then you sample. You take samples of whatever it is you're dealing with. And then those can be, scientifically examined or whatever. Then you survey the scene. You survey the scene, which means you do photographic review, you do photographic log, you take note of a situation like weather conditions, you take note of everything that's going on around in the environment. And then the final thing, you take statements. And the trick with statements is that even when it looks like there's no witnesses, there's always witnesses, always. Whether you're talking about a CCTV camera, whether you're talking about some kind of surveillance device or people, there's always somebody that's a witness to whatever incident you're talking about. So you proceed from there, and that's the actions of any basic investigation. That's what you use. Those are the basic skills that you use. And that has to become a part of the DNA of any investigator so that they have a base to go from. Because we don't go after things the way that journalists and scientists do. It's a completely different situation. And once you learn those basic investigation skills, you get experience and you learn to talk about the nature of things also. That's another thing that distinguishes law enforcement investigation from scientific or journalistic investigation. And I'd say learning how to deal with the nature of things, whether it's the nature of criminals, the nature of a certain type of subject, nature of alien visitors, how they tend to act. That's one of the things that's always missing from scientific analysis or even journalistic analysis. But that's something that law enforcement always has in our mind at all times. And if you go and look at the investigations of any experienced law enforcement officer, that's even if they're investigating paranormal topics, that will always rise to the top. Their discussion of the nature of things, how this type of person, this type of creature, even dogs that are helping to hunt for crypto creatures. How do they normally act? How do they act here? See, the nature of things is like the highest element that law enforcement officers will explain and deal with that really gives them a huge advantage in dealing with unknown mysteries. It's a really big thing.
Wow, brother. Well, you definitely said a lot there. What I really loved was just assuming mainstream is false, and I think that's so important because, for me, even in my teens, having conversations with my dad, early 20s with my friends, where do you get your information from? Exact same thing. The internet's all nonsense. But I was like, this is like, I studied psychology. Well, in my own endeavors, I wanted to know how we still had war, and so I looked at all of the propaganda, things like that, and I was like, whoa, we're actually easily manipulated. And when you look at these sort of things, and you can start to realize that there is an agenda behind the mainstream news and most news, and you can take a step back, and then if you're now opening up to broader perspectives, to citizen journalism and alternative news, whether it's collective evolution, whether it's other online publications, then you can just use that same critical thinking and then filter it through your heart, and like, does this resonate? Does this person have an agenda? What's going on? But it's so difficult. That's one of the major awakening things for some people, is just to unplug from the news. Like, that's step
Absolutely.
one. You have to do that. So it's really important. So if we're going to go all the way in, and make it as deep as possible with this, because for me and where I am and in my experience, I've been trying to discover the truth. I want to know what I'm capable of, what humans are capable of. I want to know what's going on in the planet. I want to know why it doesn't make any sense, why we're still killing each other, how the hell the government is still in power when they're obviously just a bunch of crooks, stealing taxes, just like in Monty Python, In Search of the Holy Grail. It's just like, it's the same thing. You just got a bunch of brutes, now they're the IRS or whatever, taking your money. It's all broken. You don't even have health care. I went traveling to Nicaragua and I bought health care, a travel insurance. When I got there, I realized that they had free health care. And it's like one of the poorest countries. And I was like, the States doesn't have it. So it's a consistent fear thing. And that's what I wanted to touch on with the Dog Walkers Union. When you get outside and you start talking to your neighbors, when you go to events, when you go to festivals, when you get into the community, you realize everybody's the same. Nobody's trying to kill you. There's nothing to be afraid of. Go outside. Right. But when you look at your TV, everybody's going to blow you up and stab you and all that kind of thing. So you're literally deprogramming. That's why TV is called programming.
Right.
So, and so a lot of people too, they can't handle aliens. That's too much for them. That's, for me, that was my actually sticking point until I did ayahuasca. Aliens always in my research came up, and I stopped there because I was crazy enough. Nobody understood me already, so I'm not going in. And then I drank ayahuasca. First question I had, so aliens, and then and then that door's been open ever since. So
did you meet some alien visitors while you were doing your ayahuasca? Because a lot of people do relay that experience, that they do meet them.
I didn't get to meet any, but it broke my brain in every way imaginable. So I thought I was going to have a whole bunch of answers, and all I got was about 10,000 more questions. And then I did have a UFO. I've had two direct experiences of orbs. I call them orbs or light ships. Have them both on film, and I was both times by myself, and they were 100 feet away from me both times, and it's just like this orb is gnarly. And so yeah, doing, contact in the desert. And if you do any kind of research on the pyramids, like Robert Schoch was there, JJ Hertalk is super interesting research. but there is definitely misinformation in that world as well. And so coming from the perspective of, I think awareness allows us more options, right? So if we're aware that aliens exist, then we're like, whoa, there's another intelligent species. Whoa, there's many of them. How high can we go? Let's say the whole world is out of shape and there's one in shape person. Then we're like, whoa, that's a possibility. It's a possibility to be in shape. So if aliens now become in the realm, our awareness expands. It's like, whoa, like, can we evolve as a species? Can I evolve as a human? And that's kind of how I see it, as a very useful form of thinking. So with everything that you've looked at and researched and studied, um, what do you think is going on the planet, and how can we liberate ourselves? And then how can we build a new Earth and overcome this? Because it's in my belief system that we are being suppressed through it. Systematically, we can individually choose to not play the system, and I think that's where I start. But how do we liberate ourselves from a system that really doesn't serve people or the planet or a governmental system? And what do you think's going on?
Well, I have to finish the rest of the presumptions that I told you people need in order to become para-investigators who are better able to deal with this universal deceit that is going on. The first one, of course, is change your presumptions. Eliminate your previous training, your previous conditioning, of course. And then once you change your presumptions, your new presumptions are going to be anything, number one, like I said before, anything coming out of the government mainstream media complex is absolutely false. Just have that as a presumption. Second presumption, what you are being presented with is a cover story, a story that's being used to cover up what's really going on. Now, and decipher, what is that cover story? Once you decipher what the cover story is for, then third, you can decipher what results are they trying to herd us towards? And what is the reason for that? Why are they trying to herd us towards this result? And then that allows you to be in position to pierce towards what the truth really is. A great example of that is what's happening in Antarctica right now. I've had a lot of bots out. I've had a lot of spider crawlers out that have returned to me information from people returning from Antarctica, people who worked out there, and people who are out there now. Oh, were you out there?
No, what are bots and spider crawlers?
Oh, well, you probably just call it a different name. It just means when you put out things in the web to collect, when you don't trust mainstream news, and so
gotcha.
Instead you put out your own alerts and crawlers for a single word information. Like for me, I have them out on the word Antarctica. Got to spell it right. It's got a weird spelling, but put it out on Antarctica, and you put out crawlers out there for any news, not just news though, any messages on message boards, any sort of information on any publicly viewable stuff. You use Google's technology against it. In other words, for liberty instead of for tyranny, and you use that ability to crawl, and you come back anything that comes back on Antarctica. Then you have to take that big pile of stuff and you eliminate anything that's political. You eliminate anything that's on the environment, because the environment's being used as just political stuff these days. And you eliminate anything that's on science, because that doesn't really help either. And then what you're left with is a pile of stuff, people talking about Antarctica, talking about what's happening out there, what they've actually seen and their own experiences. Because no matter how many, you can sign all the non-disclosures you want, but you can still talk about your own life. So people on the ground in Antarctica, they can actually talk about what's happening to them. And they do. And so you can find out. And one of the things that keeps coming back to me is that they found Atlantis under the ice. They found Atlantis. I'm not totally sure what that means, but apparently there is there is alien technology down there, and in all the nations. It was just 5 nations just a short time ago, but now they're up to like 32 nations are out there, and they're all like never before. They are all jockeying for position, and they're getting all kinds of technology out there. Anybody doesn't have a job, they're hiring thousands and thousands of workers on the peninsula. They are building major infrastructure out there, and all the nations are getting ready to jockey for position for getting the share of technology that's been found out there. And it is going to get crazy really soon. I don't know if you've done any shows on what's going on out there, but it is insane out there in the peninsula.
No, I've heard of the Antarctica find through Gaia. So where does okay, so this is going to be new and heavy for a lot of people, but some not, so I'd like to speak at the highest level of it. From your perspective, do you look at, I've heard disclosure is coming of different alien races. Do you have a sense or an intuition on what the alien agenda is, if they exist, how many different races there are, what's going on in Antarctica? I'll to give you a framework, because I'm talking to you, so I'm just going to do this for my own thoughts. So I go to Contact in the Desert. I'm watching some guy at TV. I'm watching some documentaries. I hear different things all over the place. Where my guess is what's going on is, okay, aliens exist. I've heard that we're in some sort of quarantine, because I like to say we're like toddlers with shotguns. And there's a suppressing race that's been here controlling stuff for a while, and now they're starting to leave and have less control over the planet. So now we kind of have them being extracted by the benevolent, good galactic family, or whatever the case is, and slowly we're going to be kind of liberated as a human species, and have the option to kind of build a new society or a new Earth without being impeded by all these suppressional mechanisms, and then we're going to be introduced to extraterrestrial life slowly, so our brains don't break, because it's going to be a huge, massive jump. And that's kind of like what I've deduced from everything that I've looked at. That's my sense. I'm just wondering what your sense is on that whole, what I've just said, and clearing distortions, and what your feeling is on that whole thing.
I think you're absolutely right in the flavor of everything that you said. We have the cases that I've gone through, and and I have to refer to my book, The Extra Dimensionals, which is True Tales and Concepts of Alien Visitors. Basically, the cases I review in there and the cases I've seen over the years, it's and I get asked this question all the time. It's clear to me that there are malevolent alien visitors, bad ones, evil ones that don't want anything good for us. If you even go to check out the case of Betty and Barney Hill in 1961, the first really globally known alien abduction of people here on Earth. That was a horrific experience for them, and their interviews are still available today on YouTube. They're in black and white, but they're still up there. And it was a horrible experience. They never got over the experience their whole lives. That's a malevolent experience for them. But as you go through the cases, you can see also that there are very positive experiences of alien visitors. There are alien visitors that uplift and help people. There's even been experiences, I've seen experiences of people where they have diseases that are healed, completely healed of theirs by alien visitors. So both parts are true, because I've been asked, are aliens evil? And yeah, they are, but there's also benevolent ones too. And now what it appears, we can see by circumstantial evidence, it appears that the evil alien visitors are in some kind of uneasy alliance over the last hundreds of years, who knows how long, with the elite powers in control that believe they govern all of us. Well, basically, at least they tell the nations their marching orders every day. tell the presidents and the prime ministers what they can do, what war to go to. What you were talking about, why is there still war? Well, there's still war because there's global powers, there's elite powers in control who wake up, tell the nations every day where to go, what to do, and what they can and can't do. And that becomes obvious, especially if you look at wars, where you see these, especially in the last century, you see nations going to war and doing things, especially in the Western world, going and doing things that's against their own national interests, and things that make going to a war, getting into a war that makes no sense for them. They're not even getting any resources out of it. They're not going to war for any reason that would help them in any way. And yet they still do it. And they do it as groups of nations, not just one. So why is that happening? Well, it's obviously because someone that's above them is ordering them to do it. So it appears that the malevolent, the bad alien visitors have been in some kind of uneasy alliance with the elite powers in control who govern the nations, tell them what to do, basically. And that's been going on for quite a while. And one of the ways I know that I know that for sure is because there's some kind of a standing order that has been given to all the nations. And it just says one thing: you will keep concealed anything that reveals any truth about UFOs or alien visitors. And we don't even know the reason why, but that's some kind of standing order that every nation has. And if a person wants to know what I'm talking about, all you got to do is Google NASA cuts the live feed. That's all you got to do. Google NASA cuts the live feed. And if you do that, you'll come back with dozens of examples of NASA, those satellites that are just filming above the atmosphere of the Earth, the outer atmosphere of the Earth, just right up there where space starts. And there'll be just a live feed, but whenever an unknown UFO comes into view, suddenly that feed will be cut. That'll be cut. And that happens over and over again, and it has for many years. And that's not just one president or one prime minister. That has always been going on. And what's funny is if you Google ESA cuts the live feed, European Space Agency, you get the same results. And do so in all the space agencies of all the different nations. They all do it. So that means there's a standing order, because the technician that's there monitoring the feed doesn't have to go call a superior and say, hey, what should I do with this? They all know they got to cut the feed right away. And that's true. All the nations around the Earth, they all do the same thing. So where did that order come from? It didn't come from a president or a prime minister, because they all have that same standing order. So anyway, that speaks to what you were talking about, that there's an alliance there between these alien visitors, who are the bad ones, who are the malevolent ones, and our elite powers in control, because that order alone shows that something is going on there. But yeah, also there are the benevolent alien visitors too. And at some point, very soon, I think, we're coming to a crescendo. We're coming to a point where there's going to be this enormous clash. And so we need to learn how to reach out to the benevolent ones so that we'll be ready and able to deal with the agenda of the malevolent alien visitors that are working hand in hand with the elite powers that believe they govern the Earth. And they do govern the Earth by the institutions of the Earth. They don't govern us as individuals. And so, we have to learn to deal with that situation. That's what we're looking for.
Wow. Yeah. So that definitely echoes my research. I'm 100%, down with that. It's interesting because if you look into it, it might be a little bit easier for you, not you, I'm saying the listener, like not to be ridiculed, but you're going to be, most of the friends or whatever I told this to, they think you're losing your mind. It would help if I was an FBI agent first, because then, you can't really mess with me. Right. But that's why I have people like you on the show be like, like aliens don't exist. Well, I just interviewed an FBI agent. So, kiss my ass, like maybe do some research. And so it's challenging because they're stuck in that model. And, the compassionate is I want to break them out, but then, I want to say, hey, like I want to open your mind so you know what the heck is actually going on here. But you got to want to wake up and care for yourself. And so I just wanted to ask, what do you see the best route is to, Michael Tellinger, who I saw speak in Sedona, talks about a lot of, if you do some research, you're going to figure that out. What's the best way for us to liberate ourselves, or what do you see the solution for liberating humanity as a whole in? Because it seems like, for me, when I went into this in my early 20s, it was depressing because it seemed like a very epic stranglehold. It was like Hulk Hogan versus a toddler. It didn't seem like there's a lot of chance for humans, especially because Hulk Hogan is the man. He just beats up Macho Man, no problem. Like he's, so if we, how do we, what do you recommend? What do you think we need to do as a society? I think one of the things that you said was really important, that walkout, the dog walkout. We gotta check out of this system and check into a new one. But there's little kind of creative ways that we're doing it now. And if we can do it in create new systems, and that's what I'm all about. That's why I go to festivals. That's why I have these conversations, because I'm so passionate about having a bit of land and be like, yo, here's food, water, vegetables, clothing, and a place to sleep. Now we don't have to, pay taxes and get into this thing that doesn't make any sense. So with that rant, how do you see, how can we liberate ourselves and then also humanity as a whole so we can really thrive, of what we're capable of?
We need to answer your question. We need to do more of what we're doing right now, which is support citizen journalists and these nodes of liberty, people like you who are bringing us independent analysis, independent knowledge, because this is a replay of the Dog Walkers Rebellion right here. And this is the only way we're going to be able to withdraw from these mainstream institutions. And so we need to just reach out and support people like you, people like me as well, and all of these people who are independent thinkers, independent researchers, independent journalists, and just keep on helping them to do what they do. However, on the other hand, though, if you know the great British philosopher Neil Kramer, he's really a great thinker, and he said, don't try to wake up everybody. It's not going to work. He says, if you sneak up on a sleeping baby and say to that baby, hey, wake up. He says, what's going to happen? He says, that baby's going to start crying. He's crying like crazy. And he says, think of that baby. He says, that's exactly what you're going to do with people who aren't ready. People who aren't ready. They're just going to start crying like babies and complaining and fussing. He says, so it's a losing strategy. Don't do it. Jesus Christ was questioned by Pharisees who said to him in a very similar way to Neil Kramer. They said to him, hey, if you're really, who you say you are, then do a miracle right here in front of our eyes right now. Make some magic. Make with the magic, and so that we could see it and believe. And he said no. Jesus said, no, I'm not going to do that, because if you wish not to believe, then there's nothing I should do to force you to believe. And that's exactly the same point, because those Pharisees and those people who, and also today, those people who say, show me some proof. Yeah, Antarctica. Yeah, UFOs, aliens. Yeah, show me some proof. They're not really saying, show me some proof. They're really saying, like those Pharisees, they're just saying, force me to believe. And that's never something we should try to do, because we can't force them. And we shouldn't try. We shouldn't try to force them to believe. If they wish not to believe, then leave them be. That's it. That's how you have to be, because it's a losing strategy otherwise. And that's why we just need to keep on doing these conferences. We need to get together with people who are ready to awaken. We need to reach out to them through media, something that you know quite a bit about. And we need to expand our reach in media, because the old gatekeepers are dying. They're all dying, and they're still bothering us with their death throes, but they're dying. And so we got to take advantage of that too.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a fantastic answer. I'll add my 2 cents just because I want to just be by being the example, by by educating yourself, by tuning in. When you do meditative and personal practices and things like that, all that you can decipher the bullshit so much easier. So someone's like, oh, how do you decipher through the internet? Well, I've meditated probably like hundreds of hours in my life, so I can literally just filter it through my heart, and I might miss, but probably I'm going to hit. I hit a lot more often than I miss. So doing the personal work, being love and compassion, being kind, and then it can all, what does it mean? How is it affecting you right now? Just educate yourself, better yourself, and be kind and loving, and don't be fearful. If anything is coming through your radar, your news feed, it's fearful and separation, take it out. It's probably propaganda for something. So, just by literally massing yourself and try to think about other people. I was gonna go pretty masculine with the way I was gonna phrase that, but just try to think about someone other than yourself. Like, if you've got kids coming in, look at the world around you. Like, actually look at it. Look at all these institutions and things, and know that you are the one that builds it. Our parents, off the my dad and that generation, they built all this stuff, so I have the internet and I have the freedom to do all these things. A lot of those people has never had the option to do that. I have the option to educate myself through the internet. I have the option to look at different points of view. I have the option to learn about health, wealth, fitness, UFOs, how to make a fire, survival, anything. So take it upon yourself to better yourself, and don't set your bar so low. So that's my rant on that. And then I just wanted to go into, it seems like you have some up-to-date Antarctica, because in the ufology, UFO, aliens, it seems like that's like the new hotness. It's like LeBron James just came out, or Steph Curry, or whoever. So it's like, holy crap, Antarctica. And what I have heard is a city under the ice, ancient technologies, things like that. Where are you on with that update, and what's going on over there?
Well, here's my update. They are trying to, the people on the ground over there, which is a lot of military officials and high scientific officials from each of the big nations who are over there, they are just begging the prime ministers and presidents not to visit, not to come, because it's going to bring too much heat on them to do that. So, there's all kinds of political figures and even religious figures that have been visiting, but they're trying not to. Well, that got ruined just about a month ago by Putin of Russia, who announced that nobody's going to cheat Russia out of their share of the technology, and that he is in person going to go down there to Antarctica and visit. So he announced that. So that kind of ruined the system they had going there to make sure that the presidents and the prime ministers didn't visit. What that means is that Trump is going to announce that he's going to visit Antarctica as a statement wow. To counter Putin's statement, because Putin's statement is clearly just Russia's going to get their share of technology. Nobody's going to cheat them. And so that means probably a lot of other prime ministers and presidents are also going to announce visits. And what that's going to do is they're going to have to bring forth a cover story, like a massive cover story. And if anybody wants to see what the cover story is going to be, all they got to do is Google Nazi base under the ice in Antarctica, because there probably is a Nazi base under the ice, but it's about 1/1000th of what there is under the ice down there. But it would make a great cover story for finding something under the ice. And it's been used before. So if you Google that, you will find that for the last 20, 40, 30 years, there has been always talk about this Nazi base that was under the ice in Antarctica. I think it was called New Schwabenland, and they were building it, and supposedly they were in contact with alien visitors. But so what they're going to do, I believe, what they're going to do is, because they need a cover story, a better one than, oh, we're just visiting down there for global warming. That's not going to work. It failed miserably when they tried to use it before. And so what they're going to do is say, okay, and they're going to dust off this old story of Nazi base under the ice in Antarctica, and they're going to recycle it and use it again. And then they can just go around the earth, go get old Nazi memorabilia, pack it in there, and then, just march it out for the mainstream media. And mainstream media will obediently, film it and just say, okay, this is what they found. Here's this Nazi memory. Here's Hitler's mustache. Here's this, here's that. And they'll say, oh yeah, and the Nazis had some advanced technology. We're looking into that too. And here's we'll see what we have on that. So I'm thinking that's going to be the cover story that they use, because it's believable. It has a lot of history behind it, and people will accept it, especially if mainstream is reporting that. And that'll give them some breathing room to deal with what really is under there without too much scrutiny. And so that's the way I think they'll be going with it. And in the meantime, there is going to be some incredible technology that's going to come out of there. And then the question becomes, will any of it get back to the people? To the people of Earth, to all of us. And I think it will. Because especially because of the new populism that you've got going around the Earth. I think with guys like Putin and Trump, who are real mavericks, who consider themselves people of the people, whatever, and many other leaders who are kind of thinking the same way. I think there's a good chance that some of this free energy, free anti-gravity technologies, it could get back to us, which is going to be tremendous in the months ahead.
Wow. Sounds awesome. I hope so. That would be really great. I don't know much about Putin or his policies or who he is, but he just seems like a badass. He wrestles bears, and he just literally is like, nope, like I'm going to do this. And like, right. Don't mess with me. He doesn't seem like you can be coerced by, let's say other entities or institutions, because that would be frightening if a whole country is threatening you and you're like, and you're Russian, you're like, come on, man, get out of here. Like, I'm not falling for your bull crap. Exactly. So I like him for that.
That's exactly why I could see him just bringing back free energy to all the Russian people, and just doing it just like that, no matter what the globalists threaten him with, because the globalists are not going to want to share the technology. They'll want to monetize it and put it out through their institutions, which they already own. But guys like Putin and even Trump and others who kind of follow the same mold, they're gonna resist that, and they're gonna want to do whatever they want to do for the people. So that'll be quite interesting to see in the coming months, which is going to be sooner than people think.
Do you see Trump as almost like actually a man of the people? Like I'm Canadian, so when he got elected, I loved it, sheerly on the fact that people got pissed off, because like you got to realize that you have Coke and Pepsi, you have Best Buy, Future Shop, or McDonald's and Burger King. Both options are ridiculous. The options for our leaders should be so amazing. You know what I mean? It should be like Michael Jordan and LeBron James, and you're like, oh my God, which one am I going to pick? And then those two guys are like, or women or whatever, are holy, we're going to work together. That would make sense. You got the leading scientists, philosophers, awakened beings. That makes sense. You got to realize it's a broken system, for frig's sakes. So frustrating that you can't see that. Drives me nuts. So then Trump gets in and pisses people off, which I love. But I see him, as somebody who actually doesn't follow the mold of those pressures. And I'm wondering if that's how you see it too.
Well, I see Trump and even Putin as well as being a small part of a much larger movement against the globalists, the elite powers in control. And it's just this populist movement that's resisting everything that the globalists want, everything that they do and everything they've worked for across the planet. And it's a really good thing. It's a really good thing because they are more in favor of the people. They're more in favor of liberty. They're more in favor of getting the things for the people that the people need. So I don't think it's Trump by himself. I think he's part of a much larger movement across the planet that is just in rebellion against these globalist initiatives that just want to put everybody into slavery, into this corporate type of slavery that's going on. And I think that's going to bear a lot of fruit in the next few months, even.
Amazing. Well, my friend, it's been a real pleasure. So I want to do 3 quick questions that you can answer in. Well, it's kind of like one question the same before I let you go. So, X-Files, Star Trek, and Star Wars, fact or fiction?
X-Files, fact. Star Trek, maybe in the future. And Star Wars is alternate reality, not our reality.
Love it, man. Well, thank you so much for who you are, man. Thank you for doing all the work and sharing your experiences, going to the FBI, coming out, serving the awakened community. I love how we became friends on Facebook, and I gave you a friendly razz right away. But you just had such a beautiful answer, and when I met you and your lovely wife, you guys were just so warm and welcoming and just amazing people. But you're doing amazing work for everybody, and you're going against the grain. It's not a comfortable thing. Like I said, it's easier for me as a bearded snowboarder to say these things, but when you come out of an actual institution and you go against the grain, you ruffle feathers, and it's a much more challenging process. So just thank you for all that, and just being who you are and coming on the show today, man. I appreciate you.
No, thank you, Matt. It was awesome. It's great time. Thanks so much, man.
You're welcome. I want to ask, is there anything that you wish that I had asked, or anything you want to leave the listeners with?
I just want to leave them with, go on my Facebook, John Desouza Facebook, and just look at scroll down, and you get free samples of my book, 50 pages from Amazon on the para-investigators and on the extra dimensionals. Just free samples, 50 pages each of my books. And my website is johntemmabooks.com. And I just want people to learn to decipher truth for themselves and to just resist and get out of this mainstream system of information. Listen to Matt. Don't listen to this freaking the evening news. It's not going to get you anywhere.
Awesome, brother. Well, thank you for the plug. I appreciate it. Listen to John, man. He's wonderful. And if you're listening on the podcast, definitely check this one out on YouTube to see his lovely smiling face. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you, and hope to have you back on the podcast soon.
Awesome, man. Take care. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. See you guys. Peace.